Welcome to the Voice of Retail for the week of November 4th, 2019. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada and sponsored by Environics Analytics. Environics Analytics helps companies in retail, CPG, and the cannabis industry turn data and analytics into insights, strategy, and results. EA produces Cannabis Insights, the market-leading source of neighborhood-level insights for the cannabis industry. This episode is intended for adults 18+. In this week's episode, we delve into the world of Cannabis 2.0 retailing from several different perspectives and parts of the value chain in Canada and the U.S. First of all, I visit with Aaron Bouganim, Managing Director at CannMart Inc., right in their impressive facilities in Toronto. We talk about his rich history and perspectives in the medical cannabis space and the road ahead to 2.0. Next, the first of a two-part interview with veteran retailer, digital maven, beauty and wellness pioneer Angela Kapp from Arizona. We begin our rich conversation looking back at the early days of digital retail and the beauty category, right through to Angela becoming Co-CEO of TruPotency, a bespoke retail solution for the American CBD marketplace. Lastly, I speak with Canadian cannabis wellness expert Crystal Laferriere, live in Calgary. We explore her very personal journey to a now very professional role in the cannabis and CBD space, including a new listing and presence in Quebec's retail cannabis chain, SQDC. Lastly, I'll take a look at the retail news of the week, but first, let's listen to my interview with Aaron. Aaron, welcome to the Voice of Retail. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm excited to tour the facility. We'll get to a little bit about that later, but let's start. Tell me a little bit about your personal and professional journey and a little bit about the organization you work here with.
Absolutely. So, Aaron Bouganim. I've been involved in the cannabis space for the last 6 years now. Mm-hmm. I got involved back in 2013 when CannMart was a dream.
Right.
The early application stage, I was employee number one. This is back in the MMPR days, and we spent 4.5 years adjudicating CannMart's business model.
Yeah. And the MMPR days, just for the listeners who aren't familiar, is the first kind of iteration of the licensing for medical cannabis.
From a corporate standpoint, yes.
Right.
If we're talking strictly medical, the first generation would have been the MMAR.
Right.
So that's the Medical Marijuana Access Regulations, and that was limited to one licensed producer at the time, and basically people who were home growers like myself. And that's kind of how I got involved in the industry. I am still a cannabis consumer. I've been one for 3/4 of my life. Cannabis has helped me medically. I got involved in a couple of bad car accidents where I was rear-ended twice in 1 year, and I turned to cannabis as opposed to traditional, chemical compounds.
Sure.
And again, it's changed my life.
Right now.
Not only from a medical and well-being standpoint, but professionally as well.
I was going to say it's both a personal and a professional journey for you too, right?
Absolutely.
So let's talk about the professional piece. Let's connect the dots for us. What do you do here, and tell me about CannMart? So
I'm the managing director at CannMart. I am focused on day-to-day operations, business development, and really scaling the company. We've worked really hard at positioning CannMart as the true distribution partner for licensed producers. Most licensed producers in this space are focused on being everything to everybody, where CannMart is just laser focused on being a partner effectively for these licensed producers who want to focus specifically on cultivation. So we're helping them get their product to market, in some cases helping them develop a brand and get that to market at the same time. Right on. So it's good for me, and I think good for the listeners to understand. What I'm trying to understand is piece together the ecosystem of the industry, right? So if I play that back to you just so I've got it right, so what you do is you help the small producers and allow them to focus on producing great product and less about the regulations and the packaging. You take care of that for them and then help get it to market basically through the distributors, right? Is that a fair assessment? Nail on the head.
Perfect. So we're in a facility here in Toronto. Tell us about the facility where we're sitting today and what its role is and what its function is.
So we have a purpose-built distribution facility. Basically, our function is to bring cannabis in several formats, but for the most part in bulk. So we'll receive dried flower or cannabis oil in its raw format, and we will effectively package it, label it, which is processing, in not so many other words, and then get that.
So your expertise is to know, one of the things you're experts in is to know the packaging regulations and what it looks like, because those are fairly fairly standard. Now that would be whether it's in containers or pre-rolls or all kind of different formats.
That's right, absolutely. And one of the value adds that we offer to our cultivation partners is the flexibility to choose from literally hundreds of different packaging mediums. There's pretty much a catalog that they can pick from and say, you know what, this makes sense and it's on target for our brand guideline, and that's kind of what we want to deploy in the market.
Right.
So we're not limited to just one packaging medium. You're stuck with a pouch or you're stuck with a big bulky container.
Sure.
It's you kind of pick and choose what makes the most sense for your company and your brand.
Right.
And you can do all of that without having to bring on those packaging lines and the expertise that comes along with that to get your product packaged into market.
That's a really neat model, and so in addition, you also sell directly on the medical side, right?
Yes.
Right. So you got those two components. That's where your origins are, but then when recreational became legal, that became part of the business model as well. Right?
Exactly.
Right on. So let's talk about this podcast is going out on the 17th of October, so it's a kind of a great anniversary for the trade, but it's also a step forward into 2.0. So how are you thinking about the first year of retail cannabis and its success and where it kind of sits in terms of education of the customer? What are your thoughts on how the industry is doing, particularly the retail side so far across the country?
The retail side's still struggling. I think the black market, as everybody knows, is still very much alive.
Sure.
There's been a lot of struggles with respects to product, specifically dried flower. Cannabis oil, quite frankly, just isn't where it needs to be today when you compare it to that of the product in the black market that exists. So consumers are still inclined to purchase from those traditional outlets,
sure,
where they're getting better product, better pricing, easier access. And that's, I think, what has to change.
Right.
So fast forward to where we are from a year ago, we're still.
We put a bit of a nick in it, but I wouldn't call it even a dent quite yet. I think we hit. I was looking at Stats Canada data from last week. I think we hit 100 million in sales in the recreational legal market.
Yeah.
So we're just scratching the surface, really, right?
And when you look at those numbers, I'm sure you may have seen that Stats Canada recorded that only 25% of the entire country's sales came from legal sales.
Right.
So
not surprising. I was looking at some stats from Colorado, and what are they, 4 or 5 years in, and it's still 40% legacy or black market, or is it 50%, one or the other? So this is not an overnight thing, right? But what are those kind of key elements where the regulated legal market can win? What's the formula for that?
I think again, it's those three components I just mentioned. It's having the right product, the right pricing, and access.
Right.
Today access, while in Ontario, some might think is been solved or addressed, it hasn't.
No, not at all.
We don't have enough stores.
Yeah.
The product availability just isn't there yet. There's a lot of the same product on all the shelves. And if you were to look at the likes of a Colorado market, you can go into a different store and almost find a different product for every store you go in.
And speaking to some of the retailers, that's one of the things that comes up is now that we're whether we're kind of close to past the supply issues. Now it's having the right product on the shelves, not just product on the shelves.
Exactly.
Right? So from your perspective, this is a great perspective. You're at that core. What do you think? What is the product that's going to make retailers most successful? So what's their most demand for and less demand for? So how are pre-rolls? Are they popular? And at one time we were thinking, was that just a tourist thing? But what's your perspective on the product and what's going to sell and what consumers ultimately are looking for?
Right across North America, what sells the most is pre-rolls for sure. Pre-rolls are definitely a top-selling SKU. Today consumers are really out there looking for, high-quality cannabis, but at the same time they're looking for something with a high THC percentage. So consumers are out there buying these high THC strains that in some case might not be the best cannabis, but, it's got the number that they're looking for, so they're making that purchase. They consume that product and then they're not happy because they didn't get the desired effects that they were expecting. I think as the market kind of fleshes itself out, we see a lot of these smaller cultivators bringing these higher quality products with those same numbers to market. A lot of the consumers will be a lot happier with their purchases at the end of the day and be more inclined to continue making those purchases from these legal channels.
Right on. Yeah, I've been thinking about the craft market, not unlike the craft beer market, right, where you have the mass produced, but then you have the craft growers and brewers. It'd be interesting to see if the market develops that way with real expertise around whether it's strains or terpenes or profiles. Is that where you think kind of a good segue to the next question? What lies ahead, right? So as much as any of us can predict what lies ahead. But from a product perspective and the people you talk to, the LPs, what are they focused on in terms of growing, and where do you think that's going to go?
Right now, everybody's focused on 2.0 products. That's coming down the pipe, as we all know, next week.
Sure. In market, probably December, January.
Exactly. So law kind of comes into force next week, and it's going to be a shuffle. Right now, everybody's starting to produce these products. But yes, we're anticipating, purchase orders coming in pretty much the day of.
Right on.
So getting ready for those purchase orders, manufacturing those products, packaging them in accordance with all of the laws. So we'll be a part of that process. So when we say 2.0 products, for those who don't know, we're talking about the vape cartridges, we're talking about waxes and shatters and edibles. That's really what's missing from today's legal market.
Sure. And that was purpose driven from the policy, right? They said, well, let's go slower than faster.
Sure.
Particularly, let's get past the election, by the way. So let's make sure that's, in the future, still going to happen, but, that kind of the 1 year breather. And many think, and I'm curious on your personal and professional observation, that edibles will really take the market forward because it eliminates any stigma of smoking that may exist. Right? I mean, it's government policy that people just don't smoke.
Right.
But edibles kind of feels to me, and I've heard other people say this, that it's another big move forward in removing any kind of stigmatization that's related to the product. Is that your observation and thoughts as well?
I mean, yeah, I wouldn't categorize them as edibles per se as being the one to remove the stigma. When you think about it, even in the last year, we've had an edible format of a product. So
Sure.
When you look at tinctures and sublingual sprays, even capsules, those could be considered an edible.
Yeah.
What I think the challenge is going to be when real edibles come online, like your, chocolate bars
Formats
and things like that.
Food-looking formats, basically.
Absolutely. The challenge will be, especially for the consumer, is the low milligram dosage per unit.
10 milligrams, right, is the maximum, right?
Exactly.
Particularly for medical, right? Because, how many chocolate bars can you eat?
Well, yeah. So if you're a medical patient, and you need what most patients need, upwards of 200 milligrams of THC to get into their system, they'd have to eat, quite a few chocolate bars. So they may end up hurting themselves more than they're actually doing to help themselves.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it's going to be a fascinating rollout. It's a fascinating market. It's such a dynamic industry. I really appreciate you taking the time to show me around the facility. It's great. Very professional facility, so thank you for giving me a tour, giving me the insight into your business and spending time with the Voice of Retail.
My pleasure. Thanks again for having us.
Angela, welcome to the Voice of Retail. How are you today?
I'm terrific. How are you?
Well, I'm amazing because you and I have such a great history and tenure, so to speak, together, and the chance to speak with you is always a treat for me. We go back many years back to early .com days, and now our paths seem to intersect again. You're in this super interesting business, and I wanted to learn all about it. But why don't we first start with a little bit about yourself? Tell us about your personal and professional journey and what you're doing today.
Sure. So my first job, actually, I was thinking about that, was in retail. My first job was working at Barney's. So that's a retailer that's in the news quite a bit today.
That's right.
Long ago in a galaxy far away, that was like my school-time job, my part-time job. And when I left business school, I actually spent a lot of time in not-for-profit. I don't know whether you knew that. Before I
did not, actually.
Yeah.
I did not.
So I was director of development for the Martha Graham Dance Company. So a pretty well-known arts figure, and that was really my passion when I was younger. I probably would have bet you my last nickel that I would never be working for a big cosmetic company like Estee Lauder companies, right?
Right.
And that's probably a theme that goes through my life that kind of comes to today. But you and I got to know each other in the early days of the internet when I was at that time. I think I started off working for Clinique, one of the Estee Lauder company brands, and wound up launching the Clinique website in the old days of 1995, 96. And so when there was, I love remembering this, there were only 10% women online, and all you could buy were books and porn. There was guys
maybe a few
selling
electronics.
device. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Netscape 2.0, very exciting because they allowed from a 16 color to a 256 color palette, which if you were in the makeup business, well, that was a little closer to what you needed to be able to do. So I wound up staying there for a long time. It's a great company. The Lauder family are terrific people. And I was very fortunate because I was allowed to be an entrepreneur in a very large organization, first when it was private, and then it continued when it was public. And in the early days when we knew each other, we were all kind of trying to figure out this internet and web thing and didn't really know what we were doing, but we knew that we had to keep experimenting. And we were kind of, in some ways, anathemas in our own companies that were very traditional. If you had asked Leonard Lauder, who his customer was, he would never say Angela Kapp. He would have said Macy's, right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
So the concept of not only moving these big companies into what we were also passionate about, which was this, kind of alternative universe, but then also, and what it meant for brands and consumers, but then also changing their mindset from being about manufacturing and selling to a retailer to being, they always were about brands, of course, but the concept of being direct to consumer. And so the better part of my career at Lauder was always involved in all those different things. So I opened up like the first retail store for Clinique in North America. It was in the Pittsburgh airport because I walked through. There were a lot of people. And, if you know retail, you say, oh, wait a second. This is
fish for the fisher.
Yeah, exactly. And people were, and at that time they started to implement rules where it was the late 90s where you had to get to your plane early, right? You had to have identification and get to your plane early. So now you're sitting around. I thought, and my boss thought I was crazy at the time, but that store wound up doing about $1,500 a square foot when we launched it. So,
and looking back at it, it seems so logical, but I remember those days as well on both the Levi's side and on Hudson Space side. And the channel conflicts were very prominent, right? So much of your business was done with your customers, your department stores in your category or specialty. And it was like, don't rock the boat. And that's been and was a prevailing sentiment for many years and in some ways still is top of minds for brands and retailers as well, right?
I agree with you. I used to say channel conflict, it's actually more in the mind of your sales team, right? Because let's face it, they live and die by those relationships. Yep. But I agree with you. Channel conflict was a real thing, and you had very large institutionalized businesses, and we were, of course, the upstarts. Now, depending upon the category, cosmetics is still probably about 15 to 20% penetrated. It's not like office supplies or toys that you never want to shop for toys at Christmas time in a store. That would be your worst nightmare. But so I think it's still there. But there was a lot of and I'm always surprised that there still is conflict, right? Mm-hmm. There still is conflict. There's still the old school style decades later, but those kind of things don't change. And when you're in big companies, that until the generation of CEOs are the people who grew up knowing, we're probably the last generation that grew up in stores, but totally understand digital. Now you have a generation that only understands digital as executives. And I don't think that's good either, because I think the consumer shops wherever she wants to shop. And our job is to be where she is while still protecting the brands that we carry or we hold dear. Right?
Yeah, it's that argument. It doesn't have to be either or. There is a strategy, and it's got to be, as you said, it's about the customer, right, and how she wants to shop in different ways, for sure.
Absolutely. So that was a long time. I spent like 17 years there and did a lot of stuff. Even served on their deal team for acquisitions, and that was super interesting. And then I had spent a lot of time in Asia for a variety of reasons. And I looked at what was going on in China in 2011, and it looked very much like the old internet days of the mid-90s. And I thought, I've seen this movie before. In theory, I should be able to make money, right? So I kind of hopped on a plane and utilized my network a little bit and wound up getting involved with two companies, one of which on paper looked fantastic, right? Online luxury startup. One of the founders was the ex-CEO of Cartier and Richemont Asia Pacific, had all the right. Anyway, it failed in a year. That's, I guess, what happens with startups, right? I fortunately didn't invest in it, but only time and energy. But then the other one was a company that was an e-commerce service provider, which I think you know, but some of your listeners may not, which are kind of these companies that help brands get online and kind of build out their web shops, et cetera. And in China, that was a little bit more complicated because I used to say the cast of characters was not the same. You couldn't use Google, you couldn't use Facebook, right? There were these new characters, Tmall, Baidu, et cetera. And the company was named Baozun. And that wound up being a terrific experience. And we took that company public on NASDAQ in 2015. So I got lucky. It was a great experience. I spent a lot of time in China, and I was what we call Jiaren, which means family. I was the first non-Chinese, except for the person that had originally brought me in. It was an investor. The second largest investor. The first largest was Alibaba, probably a name you know, and Baozun.
Yeah, heard of them.
And so it wound up being a great experience. And I realized through that and some of the other work that I'd done, kind of having my own business, is that I really liked these mid-stage companies knew what they were doing. So they got to that size where they knew what they were doing, but they were at that kind of in-between stage where they were maybe 20, 30, $40 million in retail. And now they really had to scale. They really had to stop doing things the old way.
And that's a real tripping point or tipping point, both things, actually. I find in that mid stage, right? Taking it to that next level is probably the most perilous, adventurous part of that journey, right? You've got the momentum, but then how do you take it that next big step up, that, create that flywheel effect or whatever? That's such an important piece.
And it takes tremendous courage, because what got you there is not always the same as what's going to get you, right? So what gets you from zero to 30 and is usually a slightly different skill set. There are a few people that make it, and you see them, there are a few people that make it, and they manage to stay founders of big, sometimes even publicly held companies. But it's extremely rare, which is why in the business press you often read of founders being replaced or being pushed to the boardroom, et cetera. And
different set of skills, right?
Yeah.
Different sets of skills, right?
It's a different set of skills, and you have to be almost maniacal when you're founding a company, and you have to stop being maniacal when you're scaling it. And so that makes a big difference. And anyway, so I discovered, and which is always the challenge when you've had a lot of success and have a reputation in a big publicly held company in a particular industry. In my case, it was with Lauder in the cosmetics industry, is that you are very much like me. We want to do new things. I want to learn new industries. I want to learn new stuff. And we were lucky because we were in digital retail that we had a core skill set that enabled us to look across industries. We didn't have to be confined to our own. But people, the older you are, the more senior you are, and the more highly paid you are, they want you to do what they want you to do. And so that honestly has always been a struggle for me, because I like to learn new stuff. And so after the, kind of Baozun experience, which again was a great experience, and I joined a couple of boards and worked with a couple of companies. And then I was really looking and get a lot of offers, shall we say, to do things within cosmetics, and it's not that interesting to me. It's the business has changed a lot. There are a few. I sit on the board of a cosmetic company today called Lime Crime, but it's really a lifestyle company because it's about expressing who you are, and so that's interesting. But there's not that much in cosmetics that's interesting. And so I was kind of looking around, and I had met Nate Lipton, who is the founder of, he's my co-founder for TruPotency, but he's the founder of also the parent company, which has several other brands. And he was a very smart, unusual. It was in Tucson, and I thought, wow, that's amazing, because I've lived in Tucson for 12 years. I've never worked in Tucson. I've worked everywhere.
What's the chance, right? Yeah.
Right, exactly. And I constantly say, well, what are the interesting companies in Tucson? And usually either they're not so interesting, or they're not really in Tucson. They may have a few people here, but they're not. So that's usually the way
call center doesn't count.
Yeah, right. It's usually the way it works out. Or there are things in like aerospace and defense that doesn't really work with Angela's skill set. And but I met him, and I thought, this is a very unusual millennial. He's very smart. He kind of knows what he doesn't know and wants to learn it. And I thought, he's an interesting guy. And but then nothing really, what they were doing then and what I was doing didn't really drive so much, and we didn't really stay in touch too much. And then he called me this year, and he said, hey, how are you? I said, fine. And he said, we're doing some new things, and maybe we need some help. And I said, okay, well, I'll come in and talk to you. So I kind of got sucked into it. I'm the last person in the world that is into cannabis. I barely take an Advil. Okay, so I was never into it, even when I was younger. And but it's fascinating, and of course it's an area that, much like when we were in the early days of the internet, there's a lot going on. You're a little bit in the wild west, and Nate's original company was called Growers House. It still exists. It's still it's gotten to be a very good sized company. In fact, it's the largest online hydroponics retailer in the U.S. And it's based here in Tucson. And then he started another, a couple of other things. Again, he's really smart. And he said, well, we really want to do something. And Growers House is more of a B2B business. It's kind of the picks and shovels it's not just the cannabis industry, because they're in hydroponics. They sell NASA and the USDA, right? So, but it's been fascinating for me, completely different business. And you get to apply a lot. And in the meantime, because of the 2018 Farm Bill, which had the hemp addendum, CBD became federally legal, and that led to an explosion. And it struck me that this is really interesting. And also, let's face it, as we get older, those of us that are type A's, and I know you are and I am, we want to take more active control of our health. And I'm not a big proponent of unnecessary prescriptions if you don't need them. So I'm all about, what else is out there. And now that I have a neuroscientist on staff, that's probably the first time you've ever heard a retailer say that line.
Yeah, already we're seeing some unique proof points.
It's kind of fun having a neuroscientist on staff. You have a question
on speed dial. Yeah,
exactly. Austin. What about this? There's some good data out there, and so and there's also a lot of snake oil and confusion, and that's really what TruPotency is about. So.
It's really such it's a fantastic, thanks for the background, because it's really such an interesting intersection point. And in, one comment to the listeners who may or may not know, but actually the U.S. is ahead of Canada in terms of thinking about CBD. So we'll see how that evolves over the course of time. But, your TruPotency, what I loved about it, at the beginning of any journey of any category, there's a lot of there's a lot of, as you called it, snake oil. There's a lot of claims. There's a lot of product on the market, and who do you turn to? Who do you trust? And it seems like that's been the foundation of TruPotency. So why don't you take us through a little bit about TruPotency and how it's an articulation of that vision that you've been describing, that providing solutions, because it really gets back right to the beginning of your core brand essence of you, which is how do I create something for the customer that adds a lot of value and is differentiated. And that's what I really want to talk about in terms of, how you go to market as a retail site, as a marketplace for CBD.
Sure. So I think you're right. First, it always has to start with the consumer. And I'm a longtime brand person, right? So you always want to think about competitive differentiation. And because I didn't come out of the cannabis industry, and I came out of an industry that's related to wellness, beauty and wellness are kind of coming together. I think that Nate's original concept of TruPotency was he was coming from the cannabis industry, kind of thinking about it that, hey, we know we sell everybody. We know there are some growers out there that don't have the most stringent standards. Let's just put it that way, right? And and we know who some of the people with ethics are. And so we probably have a little bit of insider knowledge about who's going to be good at this and who's not going to be good at this. And the concept from the beginning was always, let's base it on science. Let's not base it on the marketing. This is an area, and Nate believes strongly, and I now believe strongly, that they're cannabinoids, so not just CBD, but cannabinoids, terpenes, these compounds can enable people to feel better. Now, exactly what that means and for whom, et cetera, I'm not a doctor, but I think it's really important. Then I saw, as a brand person, literally this explosion of thousands of CBD brands. Suddenly, it was everywhere in the U.S. I don't know whether, again, because Canada is lagging a little behind the U.S., but it was everywhere. So everyone, and we've done a number of kind of focus group, listen and learn type events now, because we feel it's important. And we also feel that I like to say, the Josie, we call her Josie from Illinois, but she's not one of the cool kids who lives in LA, and she's not one of the ex-stoners from the 60s or ex-hippies. She is, she's a normal, everyday, professional, smart woman, or raising her kids or doing whatever, and is managing life. And she doesn't want to get high. And again, so we're at the beginning of this journey where, there's been a lot of work to destigmatize, shall we say. But for me, myself, if somebody says marijuana to me, well, CBD is not marijuana. They're right. They're come from the same plant, one of them, I think it's the same species, but different genus, if I get that right. And you are not talking to a plant scientist, so I'm not. But I think TruPotency is about, how do you have the place that you can trust when 1,000 brands are all screaming at you that they're the best? Because yes, you can go to Sephora or Ulta or CVS, but guess what? Do you think the person, the Sephora cast member, or even the buyer, is doing any rigorous testing? No, they're coming out of cosmetics. It's a much more developed industry where you don't worry about whether or not there are, residual solvents right? So they're coming from a completely different place. So I kind of think of it like you need somebody that's going to actually think about the consumer.
Krista, welcome to the Voice of Retail. How are you doing today?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for joining us. Listen, it's a great time to be talking about all things cannabis with the celebration of the 1-year anniversary of legalization of recreational cannabis and 2.0 around the corner, literally at least the product-wise. So it's a great opportunity to chat with you, someone with such expertise in the category. So why don't we start off? Tell us a little bit about yourself, your personal and professional journey, and what you do today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm really delighted to be here today to talk about cannabis. Like you said, exciting times here around the corner. So I've had kind of a long journey into the cannabis industry, and it actually started with me being diagnosed with Crohn's disease back in 2010. So through that, I was struggling, battling this, chronic illness, and it took a real significant toll on my physical and even mental health. And that's how I discovered medical cannabis as an option to help with combating those negative side effects from my traditional treatments and medicines. And through that, smoking is a no-no for Crohn's disease, so it can really inflame. So I started experimenting with creating my own homemade cannabis topicals with my personal license, and it worked really well to alleviate my symptoms. So through that, kind of started discovering that people who weren't cannabis users were really interested in what I was doing and what I was making for myself. I heard a lot of that would work for my knees or my hip, or I can use this after my workout, those types of things. So it became clear that the products had that ability to elevate the lives of everyone and reach a broader market. Cannabis legalization was announced, and my husband and I started Cannabis Goods Co. And as a cannabis health and wellness focused company, and we built out formulations and a brand, which we sold, and it's now a key health and wellness offering under Experion Wellness family of product brands, and that will be launching in 2020. So now I'm leading all educational efforts at Experion as their cannabis wellness expert.
Wow, that's quite a journey, right? From the grassroots application, solving a problem that needed to be resolved. That's very personal. It's truly a really personal and professional journey that brought you to this point. So Cannabis 2.0 is here, basically, at least legislatively. How have you been preparing for the next stage of legalization of cannabis, and how has it shaped your thinking and I guess experience as well in terms of the product development for retailers specifically, and the product you think and how you think that through?
Yeah, so the new product categories that are coming out are going to be topicals, edibles, and extract, and they're going to be put into law, I guess, in essence, on October 17th, but products won't hit the shelves right away. So what that means is that licensed producers can apply for their license then. So likely nothing will be available through retailers until late 2019 or early 2020. And at Experion, we're focusing on topicals through the Cannabis brand and working through R&D and packaging right now. But I really think this next wave of products for retailers will bring new users into the stores wanting to be educated and looking for education more from an adult use therapeutic perspective rather than, a lot of times the terms recreational and adult use are used interchangeably. And I like to think about it as adult use, because to me, if I want to buy a topical or maybe a microdose edible, I might be using it for therapeutic or wellness reasons, and I should be able to buy that over the counter and not have to get a prescription to do that. So I think that's kind of where you'll see the difference in the way that retail is after legalization 2.0, is that you'll see all these new users coming in with questions and curious to see these new products. It's just a whole new range of products, and just taking out things that aren't smoking necessarily. I mean, extracts are that, but with edibles and topicals, I think you'll see that new user base start coming into the store looking for information.
You're not the first person to talk about, the fact that you don't have to smoke the product. I mean, your personal journey was for other reasons, but other people just don't like to smoke the product. And so it feels like there's a fair bit of, stigmatization that you get past once you get past that element of it. So I guess that's what everyone's looking forward to in 2020. Is that the way you feel as well? That you talk about bringing new consumers into the market. Is that what you think will be part of that solution?
Yeah, absolutely.
Past smoking, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the stigma really is around that traditional cannabis culture, the Cheech and Chong type stereotypes. And I think having cannabis derivative products is in a product type that you're used to using. So like topicals, for example, a lotion or a muscle rub. People use those already. They buy them at the drugstore. Cannabis is just another ingredient in that product. So it makes it a lot easier to first, ease of use is a big thing for people to kind of get over that. It's a lower barrier to entry for using. And, there's product types out there now that, don't necessarily mean that you have to get intoxicated or high from it. So those products are a great entry point for people as well, just to get over that stigma. And there doesn't seem to be any problem with people putting a lotion on.
Right.
For example, one of the aha moments that we had was my husband and I had made a batch of lotion for myself, and my mother-in-law came over and she had a sore elbow and she just rubbed it all over herself, not even thinking. And this is a woman that had never touched cannabis in her life. So now we always laugh. Well, now you're a cannabis user now. So
welcome to the community.
Yeah, exactly. And people just don't think of it in the same way as like smoking a joint or hitting a bong or something like that.
Right on. So I'm sitting today in Vancouver. I think you're in Calgary. So the provincial home of Experian, I believe, cultivation and processing at least.
Yeah.
And then I'm off to Montreal in a couple of weeks. I'm here at a Retail Council of Canada event, and there's another one in Montreal. So appropriate we're talking about recent successes, because I think your products are being listed with the SQDC, the cannabis retailer in Quebec. Tell me about how that came together, and what do you think that's going to mean for your business and for consumers in the province of Quebec?
Yeah, so, Quebec actually had the second highest provincial sales during the first 6 months of legalized recreational cannabis. So this supply partnership will help fulfill forecasted consumer demand following the next wave of legalization later this year. So with there's limited supply agreements inked with SQDC right now for capsules. And that's what we're planning on bringing to market there is the Cannabis microdose capsules. So this partnership will help consumers that are looking for that alternative measure to combat acute problems. And for those people that are interested in microdosing, which is becoming a really increasingly prevalent way of consuming cannabis products.
Crystal, what's next? Thinking a couple of years ahead. It's funny when you and I talk about a couple of years ahead, there's been such change in the past 18 months and probably more change to happen. But with your experience, your background, everything you see, if you and I were having this conversation in like 2025, what would we be talking about? What do you see on the horizon a couple of years out?
Yeah, I think that you'll see some of these cannabis derivative products like topicals or CBD-based products that are non-intoxicating become normal product offerings at big box stores, just becoming more accessible to consumers. I think similar to drugstore offerings or beauty products, Health Canada had actually recently put forward a proposal for consultation to look at viewing these types of products similar to the natural health product regulations. So I think we're already kind of on that path, but it'll take some time, and with normalization of cannabis use, it reduces the stigma, and hopefully through that, the regulations will loosen up a bit so we can even just better reach people through education and, being able to talk about what these products actually do. And a lot of people are scared to try things because there is no education available through these regulated sources that, because we're not allowed to market and promote. So we can't talk exactly about the product and what type of dose to take and those types of things that are the main questions that people want to know. I just think hiding it makes it feel more provocative when it's really a natural resource that shouldn't be hidden, because it holds the ability to improve and elevate people's lives. And as long as people use responsibly, then it should be available to everybody.
Well, it's an interesting observation that, by 2025, time will have passed and people have more information, not less, and more access and not less. And great products and from a wide assortment of retailers. If listeners want to get a hold of you, how can they reach out? How can they get a hold of you if they want to chat more, learn more about you or the products that you're chatting about?
Absolutely. So you can find me through either experienwellness.com or cannabis.ca. Or I like to really keep the cannabis conversation going on my Instagram account and hear people's stories. And they can reach me there at extra_ordinary_girl. That's where you can find me there.
Well, that's fantastic. What a great handle. Listen, thanks so much for making time to chit and chat with me on The Voice of Retail. I wish you much success in the future, and hopefully we'll run into each other again and meet in person.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Michael, and thanks for having me.
Well, thanks to Aaron, Angela, and Crystal for being my guests on this episode. Now let's hit the highlights from the Retail This Week e-newsletter. I put this newsletter together, the biggest circulation of any weekly in Canada. Each and every week, 51 weeks of the year, you can subscribe for retailcouncil.org. So kicking off, and this is not actually the first time I've talked about or featured Eataly in our newsletter, but the opening week is approaching next week. Very exciting for many. 50,000 square foot location, the latest in the global chain. It's quite the food emporium. This is an article in the Toronto Star. There's been lots of articles written about Eataly, but I liked this one and included it. Of course, it doesn't really work for the podcast, but there's a tremendous amount of great pictures and highlights some of the people and just the numbers that they put together for this retail enterprise is quite astounding. 400 plus kinds of cheeses, a gelateria, a brewery, a marketplace, a culinary classroom. Anyway, so all this opening next week, so very exciting. And in case you're in Toronto, you have the chance to meet the design team behind this particular Eataly at the RCC Bricks and Mortar Forum, November 19th. That's in Toronto. Learn more and get your tickets today online at retailcouncil.org. From Business Vancouver, loyalty programs provide sales bump for retailers. So just a great overview article. Some of that is taken from Retail West in Vancouver. Actually, that's where I was sitting, where I was interviewing Crystal earlier in the episode at the Retail West conference. Dan Howe, great Dan Howe, was speaking there on behalf of Save On Foods, talking about loyalty, so loyalty and CRM. So good article there from Business in Vancouver. Some news in the Ontario cannabis space with the Ontario government putting out their budget and a couple of points that they hit. One of which is a delivery time, a kind of click and collect process that they're going to allow for the retail stores. Now, it's forward momentum, I guess, is the best we can say. I mean, there's only 25 stores operating right now across the province, which is very modest, which is a charitable term compared to Alberta's 300 plus. So Ontario well behind where it should be in terms of the number of stores that are open. But all that being said, it's good to see a few points of momentum in the right direction. And by the way, get the latest insights at RCC's Retail Cannabis Forum, November 19th. So the Bricks and Mortar Forum is in the morning and the Retail Cannabis Forum is in the afternoon. It's a great roster. I'll be there on the main stage. So really, if you're in Toronto and you're interested in retail cannabis, and you may be, given that you've listened to this episode, which is cannabis focused, be sure and join me on November 19th, Toronto. What else we got? Luxury apparel market in Canada. This is a report from, it's reported in Retail Insider, but it's taken from a report that talks about the luxury apparel market over the next 5 years in Canada growing 5.8%, which is pretty impressive, actually, considering retail is growing, 2 or 3%. So clearly some momentum on the luxury end of the spectrum. Other interesting news from Toronto Star, but it was reported a bunch of different places. IKEA, which currently has 14 of their large format stores in Toronto, looking at opening up more smaller urban stores. And actually, there's a video with an interview from BNN with our very own Retail Council Canada's very own Diane Brisebois talking about that phenomenon, the big box phenomenon, opening up smaller urban stores. She highlights the fact that really started in the grocery sector, where they took the large format as a group and started to get urban format stores. So check out that video. What else we got? Retail around the world. So Kroger, speaking of grocery, Kroger unveils Fresh for Everyone rebrand. So again, one of those things easier seen than described, but this according to Progressive Grocer, Kroger is completely rebranding, a seamless shopping experience. We know, for example, not that it's part of the brand, but they've got the big Ocado deal for delivery that's going to be launching in 2020, as does Sobeys here in Canada. So fresh for everyone is the leading brand message because it's inclusive, clear, and memorable. Supports our vision of serving America through food, inspiration, and uplift. That's quite nice. Fresh for everyone. It's kind of it's a great positioning. So we wish Kroger all the best. JCPenney creates a store, a lab of the future. Interesting. This done by Joe Jackman, great Canadian designer and strategy thought leader. Another run at JCPenney and trying to keep it modern. New font and all kinds of new things in the store. I mean, there's a little bit of criticism in the LinkedIn community about some of the features, but really kudos to Joe Jackman and his team for trying to stretch out the concept. And they do call it a concept store, so that means not everything's going to work, but it's fun to try different things and maybe stretch that brand a little bit. Wedding gown retailer, David's Bridal reaches a deal to remain open. That's from the Dallas News. So that interesting. I had no idea. It owns about 25% of all bridal dresses in the U.S., and 92% of those brides shop in a brick and mortar store. That doesn't surprise me at all. From retail dive, Beta snaps up another $50 million from investors, including Macy's. So Macy's continuing to double down or triple down on their investment in Beta. That's not their first time they put some dough in there. And of course, there is some Betas in Macy's. I was in the one on 34th Street not too long ago. Very nice kind of concept, and again, trying to stretch that brand out a little bit. Barney's, you heard Angela Kapp mention Barney's and in the news, and Barney's store's liquidation starts next week. The bankruptcy deal is going to close, and I was looking at some of the liquidation rates. They had this $1,500 handbag on for $1,350. So it's liquidation, but it's Barney style, I guess you could say. What else we got? Let's see. Canadian apparel retailer e-commerce is, according to this report, this from Retail Insider, it remains a little bit behind for a whole bunch of reasons, not the least of which is scale. So this is comparing the Canadian e-commerce apparel market to the U.S. No big surprise there. Costco Instacart testing free 1-hour prescription delivery. That's in the U.S. This is from CNBC. So that could come to Canada, though. Of course, Instacart being lots of great routes in Canada. Article here from CBC talking about people ordering on Amazon and getting expired product. And I guess that's one of the weaknesses of their vast marketplace is keeping tabs on that marketplace, and expired products is very necessary, and everyone else has to do it. So we expect Amazon to do it as well. And here that looks like they fell down on a couple things, so keeping an eye on that. And there's this long article in The Atlantic. If you get a chance to read it, again, linked from this newsletter, The Porch Pirate of Potrero Hill Can't Believe It Came to This. It's a long article on porch piracy. And typical to The Atlantic, tells this complex, rich story of people involved with each other and just circles around. So it's not an ordinary porch piracy story, but it's well worth the read. Well, that's a wrap on this episode of The Voice of Retail. If you like this podcast, you can subscribe on Apple iTunes, your favorite podcast platform. Please rate and review, and be sure to recommend to a friend or colleague in the retail industry. I'm Michael LeBlanc, founder and president of Emmy LeBlanc Company Inc. You can learn more about me on www.emmyleblanc.co or, of course, on LinkedIn. Until next time, have a great week.